So welcome everyone to this in conversation session between myself, Rachael Kiang, Curator and Manager of Gallery Lane Cove Creative Studios, and Travis De Vries. Now, just very brief introduction for Travis here. Travis is a Gamilaroi Dharug artist, he explores the evolution of what he defines as his cultural identity. So Travis works across a whole lot of mediums, including painting, photography, video, sculpture, digital mediums, which is what we're going to talk about today, digital illustration, video, sound, VR, AR, and AI. Now, interestingly, he's also the host of the podcast Broriginals and Fear of a Black Planet. Now, we can send you in the chat later details of his full biography. But let's begin. And what I'm going to try and do, just bear with me, is to share the screen and look at the specific works that he's created in the exhibition, online exhibition Metamorphosis, talk to each of those and then expand a little further and discuss, you know, the trajectory of those sort of AI works, you know, the why, the when, and the how. So let me just share screen with you now. Okay, so this is the first work that we're looking at, and you can see here it's called Digital Natives. So it's an AI generated digital image. I mean, obviously there's a brief description here about the work, but I think we're better hearing directly from Travis himself. So Travis.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the three digital images in the exhibition. There's another work of mine in the exhibition, but it's a photographic piece. And yeah, so this is a very new kind of direction for my work. It's something that I've been thinking about for about 5 years now. When I started working in VR, I started thinking and AR and AI and more tech kind of based outputs for my work. And then I started going into the sort of rabbit hole of like the actual creation from a digital perspective and from a contrived digital persona, because a lot of the work around AI is around creating one, like algorithms that create AI, but also like the actual avatars that exist in the digital space. So like you see a lot of things around AIs and deep fakes at the moment, where you have people represented in a digital space that are amalgamations of hundreds of thousands of images of people, and an AI software program has taken a little bit of this person's eye and a little bit of this person's eye and their eyebrow and their nose and like all of these kind of bits and pieces of their face, and kind of molded them together to create a digital replica of a human that is completely contrived and completely made up, but it's all made up from this source material of real people. So these, I'm treating these three works as studies for where I'm trying to go in my in this kind of body of work, and which is why they're called digital natives at the moment. I'm hoping later on to kind of work more in creating a completely contrived fictional or digitally created name. The idea is to work with these AI algorithm softwares to create an entire digital language as well that is contrived to make up this the name of this tribe. The idea is to eventually create an entire AI Aboriginal construction within the computer code. You can see like these works are, you can tell that they're digital still. They're not, they don't have necessarily the soul that a work that is made by a real person has. And I think that's like what I'm trying to get to within this body of work, is trying to figure out how to maintain the soul, or how to give this AI a soul by getting it to create its own artwork. So shall we talk a bit about the process?
Just 1 second, Travis. Let's move on to the third work first, because obviously these two are quite abstract. The third one is actually a self-portrait.
Oh, I thought this is the non-AI generated work. This is just the straight photography piece that I've worked into digitally.
Right. Do you want to just talk briefly about this first before we go back to the AI generated digital image?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. So this is a similar kind of, well, similar in that I work digitally with this, but and the concept is similar. So I'm just going to close my window because there is a dog barking outside, and I'm hoping that you guys aren't hearing that. Yeah, I guess the concept with this is similar in that I am constructing a persona that is very contrived, a contrived version of myself. It started with a series of 7 self-portraits 2 years ago, where I took a single photograph, and then a single digital photograph, and then worked on it digitally, printed it out, worked back into it with oil paints and things to kind of create 7 different, very contrived versions of myself in various stages of I would describe as like my cultural evolution within Gamilaroi culture. So one of the images had the bronze breastplate, which was historically given to members of various tribes on the East Coast by colonials, and often they were given to people, and they would say like king or chief on them, and often they were given to the people who turned against the tribes and worked with the colonials, as a like, oh, you're the king. So one of the images has me wearing one of those. Another image has me kind of embodying the more kind of spiritual, godlike creatures within Gamilaroi lore. And then one of the other images just has me painted up. And so each year I'm doing a single self-portrait moving forward that I either work in digitally or work in physically. And this year I decided to work with film. And so I took this photograph on 120 film stock, so medium format, on a Asahi Pentax 6x7, and then scanned it in. So I worked physically first, got that the film processed, and then scanned that into the computer, and then began to work on that digitally. And so I started working in the darker tones and kind of almost painting myself in digital blackface on one side. So the whole kind of concept of this work is to kind of like continue this cultural evolution as I'm going through my life, with each year a different self-portrait that I either work into digitally or physically, and continue like kind of etching into them or scratching into them. And I added this kind of pink crown onto this piece because it's, I guess, like it's a dunce crown. It's a like birthday crown. I think this year I've been dealing with a lot of mental health kind of issues within my sort of personal development and life due to the obvious lockdowns and COVID situation, and celebrating, we're celebrating birthdays and stuff as a very individual kind of ceremonial kind of marking of time, and so this work kind of speaks to my experiences in that, and my experiences of my Gamilaroi identity and colorism.
Thanks, Travis. Now, what would you say is the relation between this, hybrid analog digital portrait and your new series of AI, fabricated works?
I would say like it's in a way, like you could take it apart and it doesn't have a whole lot to do with each other at all. But then I guess like the concept for what I'm working in comes from the same place. Like I am exploring in both works, I'm exploring my relationship with my identity on a personal level. And then in the digital native series, I'm exploring kind of this contrived persona that is creating these works. I've put myself as the artist on these, but I kind of don't feel like I am necessarily the creator of these works. I'm feeding images into software, and I'm controlling what images that software receives, but it's the software that's doing the work. I'm trying to be as far removed as possible. And
you've raised a very interesting question. I was just about to ask you that, and that's on authorship. The notion of authorship and works that are AI generated. So who is the author here really? Is the question that comes to mind. Do you see it more like also a collaboration between you and all these machine learning algorithms?
Absolutely. And like, but to go back to the concept, like the core concept of what I was trying to do with this, it's almost like a statement on like the meaning of traditional Aboriginal artwork, and going back to context of them, because for like my personal belief is that if you aren't culturally connected to that story or that work, then the artwork is, or can be, if you zoom out far enough, just a pretty picture or just an abstract picture. And yes, an abstract picture and colors and composition can make you as a person feel something, but that core story that traditional Aboriginal artworks are about is very contextual to the creator and the tribe that owns that cultural story. And so like with the context of these works, the idea was to kind of try and create these cultural works that don't have that context, and be able to like almost divorce humanity from them, and then see if we can get to a point where the machine starts to put humanity back in. And then what is that context that we give it? Is it just a pretty picture, or does it gain story along the way with that context? And then where I would like to go in the future with these is to give it context, but not have me give it context, have the machine give it context.
So in other words, you're saying have the machine create a whole fictional, if you would like, cultural context for works.
Absolutely. And at the moment, my access to AI is somewhat limited through like just my access with developers and the software itself. Financially, like it is expensive to make, and the technology itself for creating a cultural context that I'm hoping to get to, I don't know is quite there. There are some softwares around language algorithms and stuff that I would like to work with, and I would like to feed these, like there's story creation AIs and stuff that you can work with, because I would like to create cultural stories for these to give them that context. Well, I'd like to get the machine to create them. It's obviously very hard to kind of talk about this, because I feel like, what we were talking about before about who is the author, I mean, at the moment, I still feel like I have some sense of authorship here, but I am hoping to move away to completely give the machine that creative ownership. I mean, I would like to keep some of the financial ownership of it. But that's just from my own
well, fair enough, and
self-preservation point of view.
Fair enough. That's why, in this case, really, I see it more as a collaboration between the artists, and the code, if you like, or the machine learning language. Now, I think at this point, it's quite timely for us to move into, talk about a bit more about your process.
Mm-hmm.
Also the ethics and morals of using AI and working with AI, so to speak, not using, sorry, that's probably inappropriate, working with AI to create artwork. So Travis.
I don't know. I think using AI is probably the right word, because I think if we give it too much humanity, then we start to get into trouble.
That's a whole nother seminar's worth of discussion there, really. But do you want to take us through your process to begin with, and then we can touch on the ethics side?
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of core process, and break it down into like 3 or 4 parts, is 1, the research part and the sourcing of images. So I go out and I find between 30 to 1,000 images that I would like to feed the AI with. And I then input them into the system that I'm using. And then that AI algorithm spends time learning those images, and it can take hours. Like, it's analyzing each one and analyzing different mapping points, and from there it starts creating by mixing all of those images together. And then the more you feed it and the more time you give it, the more it learns about those images, and to create an amalgamation of them that is no longer those images. So it's quite an interesting, I think, process in that you start with these source materials, and the computer can only learn what you give it. But by the time you've kind of worked away from there for a few hours, the machine has kind of gone so far away from those original pieces that I feel like it's no longer anywhere close to the source material. Like, I feel like there's, within the ethics kind of conversation, there's almost no sort of conversation around appropriation, because of the appropriation is not a bad thing necessarily. you've moved so far away from the original works that they are completely new things. The next kind of part of the process is I get involved again. So each kind of session the machine does, it spits out about 50 different images, dutifully creates them. It spends hours doing it. But no, it contrives 50 images. And then what I do is choose versions of those that I would like the machine to focus on. And then it continues developing them and merges them together into new works as well, which is where you get, the different colors. So I've chosen like these 3 out of those 50 to mix together and blend, because I felt like the colors were the kind of truer tones that I wanted to bring out. So, like the human control of the machine comes back into play at that point, as you choose like which image for the machine to focus on. And then the next step in the process is like rendering those images as a large format digital piece. And I don't think it shows up quite well over Zoom, because the Zoom browser is kind of processing a video of a browser on Rachel's computer, which is also a process of the original artworks. But when you see them in person, they don't necessarily have this pixelated feel to them. They can be printed at like 1 meter by 1 meter.
So quick question, and an important one. Can you just give us an idea, Travis, of what sort of source images, went into these works? And what were you thinking of when you sort of selected those source images? Are they, for example, are they digital images? Are they images as in photographs that you took of, anything like the natural landscape, or pictures, photos of your work, your own paintings? So interesting.
They are all photographs of they're not all photographs. They are photographs and digital scans. So kind of photographs of traditional cultural artworks,
right,
and landscapes. So I've taken photographs of traditional artifacts and scar trees and petroglyphs, and rock carvings are in here, as well as like some original paintings. But none of the original works are anything that I've created. I've tried to kind of pull works that are I've all of the works that I've sourced are my kind of what I see as traditional Aboriginal art.
Because I was going to say this piece in particular, the one in the center. So everyone in the audience, if you look at this closely, it does resemble in some way a more traditional Aboriginal painting. But of course, knowing if you look closely, I suppose, for example, at the top left corner, and then if you try and zoom in, you'll realize that it's not quite. It's quite different. It's not simply just a digital replication that's been put on the internet of an actual painting. So Travis, now coming back to, thanks for explaining how you the source images that you were looking at. Is there something that you want to sort of delve in further in terms of the ethics of the process?
Absolutely, yeah. So around the ethics, like it's still a question that is up in the air. Like as I said, like a lot of the concept of this work is kind of a direct result of like my own thoughts and feelings around the Fake Art Harms Culture campaign, and digital fakes that are being created, and like the kind of paint shops in various parts of the world that are recreating traditional cultural artworks, and then, you know, like chucking them on a t-shirt or chucking them on a mug, and they're being sold in shops in Circular Quay at very low rates and in the markets, in Paddy's markets, and they're, you know, they're just complete rip-offs and fakes, and undercutting traditional artworks that are being made. And so like people are losing an income from because of these knockoffs, and so this is my kind of response to that, but also like taking that one step further, and like, can we create a computer with a First Nations version of reality, or First Nations soul, and what does that mean? And I like the question of ethics and morals around it are, I guess, they're huge, and it's almost like it's too big for one person to discuss. And it's I guess like my personal feelings on it is that, I mean, ethics are rules that we live by as a society, and they're rules that are written down. Moving away from like these as being any kind of recognizable images, kind of, and the appropriation kind of conversation around them. My like inclination is to like never reveal what the source material for these works are, because then there is that conversation around, oh well, am I stealing these images to feed this AI? And I don't necessarily know the answer to that, and I don't necessarily know if I should at this stage. I think like that's a conversation for First Nations artists as a wider group. And I think like I think the concepts themselves within this scare me, and I think would scare a lot of people in the industry. This is very early versions and studies of what I would like to achieve with this.
So where would you like to get this project to?
I would like to get this project and keep developing and keep feeding the computer to a point where I don't know that they're digital creations. I would like to like get them to the point where they are indistinguishable from something that's being created by a human being, just to see if it's possible, but also like I don't think we can start having we can have theoretical conversations around the ethics of it as much as we want, but we won't actually know what that means until we put it into practice. Like we can surmise and theorize, but to actually see potentially creating a machine with a First Nation soul, or the idea of a First Nation soul, is like both a scary and kind of amazing dream for this work.
Well, there's something very interesting and sort of current about this approach, you know, whether you were conscious in sort of developing this strand of you know, this manner of working and this new direction in how you create art, that really brings in the conversation of, you know, decentering the human. I mean, in the broader humanities, I mean, for those of you joining us today who actually work in the humanities, you would know that there has been, you know, a lot of groundswell towards, you know, looking at, you know, the whole old notion of the Vitruvian man and what really feeds into the humanities is not really that relevant in our current society and way of living, really, that there is this tension to sort of decenter the human and bring in other non-human elements, and sort of really questioning how we as humans, in this case as artists, relate to other non-human elements. And in this case, in Travis's case, it's artificial intelligence. Yeah. There is something else that I want to touch on. There are two more things before we open the question we open up to Q&A for everyone. Is how is your approach different, you think, Travis, compared to other Aboriginal artists who deal with technology? And we know that there is this sort of AR and VR is very on trend at the moment, and there are other Aboriginal artists working in the digital realm. And is this something you can comment on?
In a small way. I mean, I'm not totally across everyone's work.
More with your contemporaries is what I'm saying. Like,
I know that there's a few First Nations people from Turtle Island, which is the North America, that are working in similar ways, but they're more kind of working on the AI representations of human features at the moment. I think this is, as far as I've seen, this is kind of uncharted territory, and a lot of people are, I guess, wanting to maintain control of the output with their work digitally and their work with machines. There's less people working kind of in the AI space and letting AI kind of take the reins a little bit more.
There are, but they probably don't intersect with First Nations practices.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. From a First Nations artist's point of view, I know there's lots of people working in the AI space kind of generally as artists. I think there's I think ideologically, from a First Nations point of view, we've been we've had so many kind of stops and starts, and been working from a deficit for so long in against mainstream culture that I think so many people are worried about that loss of control of their work. Whereas I guess I'm taking some big risks here and big kind of chances with working in this way. And this is why I've kind of started putting it out there in a very soft way, to sort of gauge reactions from my peers, and also to kind of cement my own thoughts and feelings around it, because I might be thinking about doing these things in the future, but I'm not sure if it is the correct thing to do or not. And
well, as with a lot of artistic practice, and I applaud you for that. So for people who don't know or not familiar with Travis's work, he does tend to explore uncharted waters quite a bit. And this I know because he was our artist in residence in 2018, and he did quite an exciting solo show that took up the whole gallery. And again, ideologically, it was quite different to what other Aboriginal artists were doing at that time. Now, one last question from me, Travis, is it is very interesting that you have gone on to learn coding and sort of, because you're not trained as a software engineer. And again, I find this is really wonderful, and it says a lot about you as an artist, that you're willing to take that step further and experiment. Is there a particular reason why you've chosen to do that as compared to a lot of other artists, which is what they've done straight away, is to go to a software engineer, and collaborate with them straight up?
Yeah, there was my original kind of inclination was to go to and start working with a software engineer, and I may do that in the future. I realized though that going and working with someone straight away in that way would be to be giving control over to around the kind of the work to another person, because the developer has kind of, I feel like in those relationships, the most sort of control over the output. And I guess like while I'm hesitant at the moment and kind of putting my feeling my way through this, I thought like from a safety point of view around these works, that it was very important to kind of maintain sort of a closed door approach and learn as much as I could around working with this software and the coding, and take hunt quietly and take baby steps forward, and feel the way out. And then I think once I'm ready to work with someone, once I know enough to be able to have those conversations with them, and not kind of give up artistic control of the work, and also like the vulnerability, like even whilst I'm saying that I have, I'm pushing forward with the sort of the work and using other people's artworks, I think I have a responsibility to all of these cultures, that I am using reference photos of their works in, and I wasn't ready to kind of give that over to another person at this stage.
That's very reasonable. Yeah, but thank you for explaining. Okay, so I think now we're going to ask anyone with questions to please sort of unmute yourself and ask away. Do we have questions from participants, attendees? Questions from anyone?
Hi Rachel. Hi Travis.
Hi, Sky.
How are you going?
Good.
Oh, what a great talk, actually. And I mean, some of these ethical and moral positions that you're dealing with are so fascinating. I think the visceral responses you're going to get, like when you start showing the works, are going to be fascinating as well. Like how people are going to take, or think about these ethical ideas, of ownership, responsibility, stealing. I bet you'll probably get things like that as well. And to me, that's so fascinating. The first thing that you were talking about, though, is the idea of giving AI a soul. Like, how are you working through that? What's that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know if I've answered it for myself yet either. I mean, the original idea with the work, like my original concept and dream for it was to go, I want to create an entire digital tribe, and their language, their culture, AI kind of composite of them as humans, to kind of create a whole cultural thing. I mean, because for me, that's a person's soul is a makeup of all of those things. It is their entire culture, but also them as a human being, on an individual level. Like it's their entire being into one kind of non-physical identity. If that, I think if that rings true for anyone else, I'm lacking the words to describe the soul, which I think every artist and poet has attempted to do at some point. Yeah, and so that giving an AI a soul, that's what I was trying, that's the dream is to try and see if I can do that, to see if we can create something that us as humans don't recognize as a computer image of a culture or another person, and whether or not that's a kind of deep fake, or if that's, you know, something that is on a level kind of real. Yeah, does that kind of answer your question? I think I'm still feeling my way through it.
Yeah, totally, because it's such a big question, and I'm sorry to hit you with it straight up. You know, because, you know, soul has so many different connotations, doesn't it?
It's a good question, Sky. Thank you. Anyone else with questions for Travis? In terms of either his process or, you know, other thoughts about him working with AI, what about his analog work, or even, you know, the specific works that we showed you in the exhibition? If feeling shy, you can just type your question in chat and we will address them. Oh, thank you. Here's one. So I'll read out the question for the purpose, and this is from Greg. Just wondering if you have the artist's permission to use the artwork, and if not, why not? As many would love to be part of something like this.
No, I did not ask for any permissions from anyone for using their work as reference images. All of the images that I've used were available in public internet searches. And so, yeah, there's, I mean, I guess there's the ethics around, like, if I'm reproducing a exact replica of those images, then I would definitely need that permission. But from an artistic ethics kind of conversation, you can use reference images and take appropriate parts of an image, and yeah, it's a bigger conversation to have, because this is uncharted territory, and yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think yeah, I think in the future I would probably look to ask other artists to collaborate on this work, but at this stage it was kind of early tests and studies to see what this process was and how it looked and what was possible, because I mean, I'm still not sure if these works are successful, in that whether they are kind of have moved far enough with the machine learning to be true kind of works with context.
I will jump in at this point, Travis, and say,
yeah,
as somebody who curates and works a fair bit with digital media, it is part of the process that you test and experiment. So, and also for people listening and attendees joining us, it is working in digital media, especially when you're working in sort of frontier territories, there is a lot of trial and error, as you would with traditional mediums, but more so. And it is really not unusual these days, and it's actually quite a good process for artists to be exhibiting like phases of their work, which is essentially what, you know, Travis is doing with his works in this exhibition. I hope that answers your question, Greg. And Travis, do you have anything else to add? If not, continue to type in chat.
Yeah, no. In the question of if not, why not? I would say, like, the way I am using them, and the way the artworks are being used as reference photos, is more akin to like a collage artist, and in that, you know, you take bits and pieces of potentially hundreds and thousands of people's work and you amalgamate them into one. It's not necessarily you don't necessarily need permission to kind of work in that way.
Any further questions? Either, you know, you can unmute yourself and ask, or type in chat. I think we have time for one more question.
I've got thousands of questions and I'm trying not to like hog
That's
the
okay. It can be the same person if everyone gets by.
Travis, I just think like that, and this isn't a real question, it's actually a comment, like what you were just saying, it speaks to the idea of abstraction, right? Like all the collaging and the how artists work, and whether there's like a single artist genius that actually makes a work. Like I think it speaks to a lot of that as well. So I suppose it was more of a comment rather than a question.
I think it's one of those things that's always an interesting conversation, and particularly around this sort of work where I am like, you know, I'm not the one holding the paintbrush. I'm just feeding thousands of images into a machine that's doing the painting. And it's like, I think moving forward, it's going to throw up a whole lot of kind of conversations and questions from the artists community, some of which other people have already tackled and answered in PhDs and various places, and people who are much smarter than I am are having those conversations already. And I you know, I feel like a small fish in an ocean full of sharks when I'm jumping into those conversations.
I think it's important to have plurality of views, and there is no one singular overarching, you know, narrative.
Yeah, I think it's not a binary answer. There is room. It's not black and white. There's room for so much grey in this conversation, and I think like even the conversation around appropriation has changed so much in the last 5 or 10 years from artists, with the rise of artworks being available on the internet, and how they're used, and people using them as profile pictures, and like, you know, and an artist not getting attributed at all or any financial remuneration for that usage, and protecting of work, and like I've created one work as an NFT at this point as well, like one single NFT, and like there's a whole kind of ethical conversation, moral conversation around the creation of NFTs and ownership of a digital piece of code that corresponds to a digital piece of artwork that you can only see on a screen. So yeah, it's a huge conversation. I think we as artists and arts workers and curators are and arts lawyers are thinking about all of these things and how they interact with the real world at the moment. And we may not see, you know, in different countries and different laws, we'll see different responses across the board, and we already have around IP and copyright and all of those sorts of things.
Well, thank you, Sky, once again for your comment, and Travis for addressing that. Just before we close for the day, just one final check. Does anyone have any burning questions for Travis?
Happy to continue the conversation at any point on Twitter or Instagram or over email if people want to get in touch.
Yes. Do you want to just share with people and chat the attendees your Twitter handle and your Instagram handle, maybe. That would be great. Because you might go away and think about it and maybe come across other works and maybe look at some of Travis's, analog works and have questions about how those relate to his new trajectory.
And my email address is freely available on my website if you want to have a look at that. Always happy to have a chat and answer emails as well.
Okay, so I think we conclude at this point. Thanks again to everyone for attending. And for those who will be listening to this as a recorded in conversation, I hope you have found this interesting. And please feel free to contact Travis directly. He's been very generous with his time if you have further questions about, his AI work. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.